Welcome back to the Eduverse Enigma podcast. Today we're chatting with Carrie Purcell, the Vice President in Digital Games at Relish Studios. This episode, we'll be diving into the Metaverse, immersive learning in VR, the blockchain, and new technologies impacting the education space. You won't want to miss it.
All right. Welcome, everyone, to the Eduverse podcast with Carrie Purcell. Sorry, is it Purcell or?
That's right, yeah.
Perfect. With Carrie Purcell, very excited to have you on our podcast that we're starting up here, and really excited to talk about immersive education and just virtual reality, the metaverse, blockchain, and all these new technologies that are impacting education in general. I guess to start off, Carrie, could you give the audience a little bit of background on yourself and what makes you a defender of the Eduverse in our community?
Sure. Thanks, Evan. So really excited to be chatting with you this morning. A little bit about my background. So I've been in education and ed tech for a long time. I'm debating telling you how long, but a while now. But the sort of the metaverse side of things, the Eduverse side of things, came into my realm about 5 years ago. So at that time, I was working at a research institute focused in emerging technologies. And amongst the various things that we were exploring and playing around with, one was, just a concept around creating a better experience for distance learning at that time. And I connected with a business partner who was, really involved in the space and had a vision about what we could create. And I helped to build a team and get some funding. In Canada, we're often very fortunate to be able to access grant funding and so on. Anyway, fast forward, we built a prototype. We got to the point where it made sense to launch this thing and turn it into a full-blown startup. So I left the research institute, and we spent the last number of years working in this space where, we had done a lot of research, a lot of user testing, a lot of focus groups. Everybody said, 100%, this is fantastic. We have this, this idea of an immersive space where our students, wherever they are in the world, can walk in an avatar representation of themselves. They can talk to each other. They can sit in a lecture hall, but they can also do simulations and all of these really interesting things. It's amazing. And we went to market January 2020, and everybody said, "Oh no, I can't get my team on board. We don't have budget for that. Nobody's ready for that." And in April, people started calling on us. So obviously, March 2020, most businesses and schools and so on shut down. And all of a sudden, they were looking for virtual opportunities to connect with people. And still, there was a lot of lag where everybody said, "Oh, this is temporary. We're not gonna jump on this wagon. We're gonna be back in person soon." So fast forward a little bit more. Facebook rebranded as Meta, and suddenly we had a name for what we were doing. And people again started coming to us just a little bit more. We had a bit more PR, and they said, "You know what? I really want to try this. Maybe just a boot camp, or maybe just a conference, or we'll do our Frosh Week, because that's a very cool way of getting people connected. But we don't, a video call isn't the same." So anyway, that kept going, and that's kind of the way that I got into this space. We started with just gaming technology, so trying to make it really accessible for any type of hardware and really, bandwidth considerations and so on. And today, if I just fast forward one more time, I'm now looking at the space more broadly. So I've moved into a role with Relish Studios where I'm VP of Digital and Game, which just gives me a chance to play in this space more broadly than in one product, right? So I get to work with various types of clients, various types of technologies, internal projects that we're working on, and also go out into the world and talk to lots of people in the metaverse and Web3 space. So maybe more than you asked, but that's sort of what I've been doing.
No, that's amazing. Thank you, Carrie. And I guess as well, can you give some background on George Brown College and the work that you've done there, and like how VR is applying there? Because I know there were a lot of interesting projects in the VR space.
Yeah, I'd love to, because I I worked at Church. I teach at George Brown now as well, but I worked at George Brown back in 2018, and I joined their research and innovation department. And GEC has some really cool things happening in their research area, in VR, and so on. And again, it's a lot of it is based on people coming together to get grant funding, create programs, and so on. But essentially, at that time, one of my a piece of my portfolio was running the digital design research grant, and that was a 5-year grant that also had some CI, some Canadian innovation funding for equipment, which is huge. So one piece of it was just outfitting a beautiful new building. We call it the Daniels Building down on the waterfront in Toronto. And we have all kinds of lab spaces. They have, you know, I- obviously this is changing very quickly, but at the time that we purchased it, the most cutting edge equipment that we could get access to, things like creating VR in real time as you walk down a hallway, and motion capture studios, and all kinds of we had user testing labs, and so on. So access to really great equipment. And then one of the fun things that I got to do there is go out into industry, small and large, and understand what they were thinking about, problems and challenges they were trying to solve, and then connect them with our faculty, our researchers, and also our student teams. So it was an opportunity for students to get hands-on learning, to hopefully start to build their portfolio and connect with companies they may end up working with, and many of them did, uh, including just a fun anecdote. I have at least one student who has now graduated, who works at Relish in our gaming studio for us now, who was on a student project. Yeah, super cool. And it's not a one-time thing. I see it all over the place, but I love when it works out like that. Anyway, so yeah, we were in the digital design studios at George Brown. We worked broadly across UI UX, but also a lot in the gaming side of things. They have a really strong gaming program, and that's where I got to dabble a little more into VR and so on.
That's awesome. That's awesome. And
Mhm.
for I think a lot of people in the academic space that haven't tried VR or haven't brought VR into their classes or
Yeah.
into their school yet, they don't know how much responsibility do you give to students when you're taking on those like community projects that are or for VR? What's the
Yeah.
type of capacity you can take on? So could you give some examples or at least one example of like a one of those projects? It doesn't necessarily have to be VR, just with innovative technology in general that you're working.
Yeah. So, okay, I think I'll try to answer this from a few different angles because,
Perfect.
um, again, like even just going back to 2018, 2019, 2020, so much has changed and so quickly. So some of what we were doing at that time, was certainly exploring immersive technologies. And even at that time, we were able to do projects around things like a universal avatar, which, as you know, and anyone we're talking, listening to, talking to knows we're not there yet, but it is a concept we're thinking about, we're trying to do. I mean, we're not there yet just because of technical limitations and the fact that we don't have standardization and regulation in what we're trying to do in this whole metaverse Web3 thing, right? But I think most people would agree that that's where we're trying to go. So we're trying to have this virtual identity that can move throughout these different virtual worlds and multiverses, the multiverse, and still represent who we are rather than changing every time. Anyway, so yeah, so we in some cases we were just bringing in gamification elements or trying to solve those really specific challenges where we knew it would be more effective if we could, for example, have a universal avatar. But today, I am, this fall teaching in the digital experience design program as well. And so that's like this really kind of micro hands-on version of how do we do this. Um, Now, what I have access to today that I didn't have 4 or 5 years ago in a broad scale is we do have VR headsets available, and we have VR labs, and we have places that even in our library learning commons center that students can go in and have kind of a private VR lab and so on. Um, my class is hybrid, so we meet in a combination of ways. We meet in person, we meet online. I push them to meet in VR, but I don't force them. And so what we've been able to do in that respect is um, use platforms like Engage, for example, where you can access it just on a laptop. So you don't have to go and get that headset, or if you don't have one, again, we are at the stage where you can I'm air quoting rent one, borrow one out from the school, or just come in and use one. But you can also have these platforms that allow you to access it just on a laptop or a mobile device. And that's kind of where we are. I know that there are people's, organizations and institutions and people out there that are creating and running entire classes in VR. And I love watching what they're doing, but they are at the forefront of where we are right now. So I don't know if that answers your question. Happy to chat about it more.
No, I think that definitely answers your question and goes into another area when you're talking about like renting equipment. I think that's something a lot of schools, a lot of professors are looking at when they're trying to introduce VR. How do we get equipment into the hands of
Yes.
students? So, yeah,
Yeah.
curious to hear what is the difference between that lab, like in the, I think you said in the library that you can go to,
Yeah.
versus renting out. How does that work for students?
Yeah. So this is actually an area I'm particularly interested in, because when I first saw headsets coming into the college and university system, and actually in the school, I think, for younger students as well, there was sort of this, like, the practicality of how do we do it, right? So the idea of bringing people into a physical space to put on a headset, um, create enough space around them so that they're not like interacting with, their peers, or they're not running into them, they're not hearing them, but then they're trying to meet them virtually. I was like, this isn't what it's supposed to be. Right? Like, why are you coming together in a physical space to go and meet in VR? That's
Yes.
that's that's weird. Um, but it's access to equipment, and in Canada, it's public education, which we're very fortunate to have, and so not everybody has that access to equipment, and so how do we make it available in the systems? And since then, I have seen better versions of VR labs where people are meeting in the same space, but in these, it's a little bit maybe COVID inspired, because they're in these stations that are kind of 6 feet apart from each other. And also, I think there's more room for them to be having individual experiences or meeting whoever they are. JBC has designed some cool spaces in their learning commons as well, where it is kind of almost a private room, right? A kind of 3.5 walls where you walk in and you have a computer, you have the headset, you have enough space to just be on your own and do that kind of thing. Um, the reason I say it's an area I'm really interested in is because for the last couple of years, there are departments and I'm going to say trailblazers, if we're talking about education, who are really exploring this idea of flex learning or high flex learning. So the concept is, how do we make it? So I mentioned that I'm doing a hybrid class now. In that model, we're generally all agreeing, we're going to do a video call this week, or we're going to come in person this week, or we're going to do a VR experience. The high flex learning concept is this, still being defined, but this really cool concept of wherever, whenever we can feel like we're physically connected and virtually connected. So outfitting these rooms, these classrooms, these labs to have various technologies, whether it's built into the physical space so that you have cameras and you have audio. And when people are virtual, they still feel very connected. And when people are in person, they know who's there virtually. Sometimes that incorporates bringing in a virtual world so that you have everybody in the form of an avatar and you feel as though you're around each other. Sometimes an early version of this was actually a curved room where you had half of a board table up against a wall, and then somewhere in the world you had another board table up against a wall, and you were able to connect by video and audio. So you felt like you were at this kind of semicircle board table. We have technologies like the owl that so the owl is kind of a 360 camera audio piece that you can put in a classroom for students who aren't there in person. And it just gives you a little bit more of a spatial feeling of what's happening in that classroom and seeing and hearing. So, point being, there's a lot of stuff out there incorporating video, audio, avatars, different types of spaces. I haven't seen much yet in the way of AR being incorporated there, but just trying to figure out like how do we do this high flex model where we really do feel connected. It doesn't matter if you're all there one way or another, IRL or virtually.
Amazing, amazing. And I think that's like a great way to set it up in today's world where you, as a student, you can, yeah, go in and get access to that technology on campus or possibly have that opportunity to take it home. Um, a couple of weeks ago, we had James Hudson from Lindenwood University. I don't know if you're familiar with him. Yes, we had him on the podcast, and they're kind of, like you said, one of those trailblazers, like ahead of the pack, where they've decided to, for most of their programs, stop offering textbooks, and now you buy a VR
Mm,
headset instead of a textbook, and
yeah.
that's what you use for your classes. So I'm curious, what do you think are like, obviously there's a lot of limitations to VR in education right now with the software that's available and other limitations. So what do you think are kind of those things that need to be put in place for the majority to start looking at VR in that perspective?
Yeah. So I appreciate that model of, when we look at the ancillary fees of higher education or education in general, what can be included. And, we have those early models of here's a powerful laptop with all the software you're going to need for certain programs. And certainly evolving from textbooks into digital materials and VR headsets, like it seems natural to me. It totally makes sense. Um, However, aside from those limitations, there are a few pieces here, and I'm only going to just kind of scratch the surface. Uh, so one is just that practical. Like I know classes that are running in full VR right now, and there are people that are just more susceptible to kind of that motion sickness element, right? So you have to in education in any capacity, you have to consider accessibility, different needs, and different accommodation requirements, and that isn't different in with VR headsets. In some cases, VR headsets open up a whole world that actually make it more accessible. But in other cases, you do have to accommodate for people who can't use a VR headset for whatever reason. So there's that piece. There is, this was, well publicized, and I know it's improving, but there is still that privacy and security piece, right? If you're over 18 and you want to share certain logins and passwords that maybe are connected to other activities that you do. You're okay with that. You can sign off on that. Some people are not okay with that. A lot of institutions are not okay asking people to do that. But as soon as you get into the younger space, it's completely different. So there is that issue as well, right? How do we like privacy and security around that, and particularly with younger users? Yeah, I mean, there's a lot, but that's just a few. And then you just mentioned, like this, what's available for software. Also, things are evolving so quickly, and it's really fun when you're like, it's cool and it's fun when you can keep up with it and you have the room and the budget to do that. Um, but a lot of what I'm looking at today is like, this is only available for Quest 2. This is only available for Pro, right? So it's a bit of that like level setting too. Lots of pieces there that just make it a bit of a challenge on a large scale, but completely accessible for what I'll call pilot projects or smaller scale playing around.
For sure. No, all very good points. Obviously, there has been with Facebook or Meta being the main company, there obviously has been a lot of privacy issues there and them having sort of monopoly in the VR space, but looks like they're making some improvements and hopefully they continue to do
Yep.
that and other companies join the space. And then, yeah, obviously there's a lot of great companies out there creating that VR content. So hopefully
Yeah.
we can get to that standard where it works across all of the headsets and is readily available for whatever industry or program you're teaching. I
Yeah.
guess off of that, and you were saying as we were starting up the podcast that your answers may change from what you would have said like 5, 6 months ago. Um, so I'm curious, what is your favorite VR like educational software that you have worked with? You mentioned Engage maybe as one of them, and has it changed in the past
Yeah.
6 months, a year?
Yeah. So I was sort of debating that question a little bit because uh, honestly, because I didn't particularly want to advertise any any companies,
Nice.
specifically. So my class this fall did get to tour around. Victory XR is working now. They're using the Engage platform, but they're creating twin campuses for various universities, mostly across the U.S. But they're also like they're doing so much more than that in all of the ways that if you're in the Eduverse space, you would be thinking about, right? Where there's simulations and there's we look at healthcare and they have the human heart and you can expand it and you can go inside of it and all of these things that we know are benefits to VR, whether or not you can meet in person. When this started, when all of this kind of um, uh, the popularization of the technology and these conversations started, it was kind of like, well, we're trying to replace what you would be doing in real life, but it's not quite as good, or it's only good in these ways, right? Like those were the conversations. Whereas today, it's like, no, this is what you can do that you can't do in real life, right? Like these are the benefits. Like there are hundreds. We could talk for quite a while on that, but there are these simulations and experiences that you can access. A couple. I think it was just last week in class, somebody was giving the example of training to remove hazardous waste. So that's something you don't want to train for in real life. Right? Like you don't want to do any more of that than you have to. But you need to know what you're doing. You need to go in prepared. So that's something that VR really allows us to do. That not that I've done it personally, but that's a training that we're able to do in VR in a better way than we could do without VR. Um, but again, especially when we're talking about education, we do have to broadly look at these different ways of accessing these immersive experiences. So I always, there are the gaming platforms. Many people will agree that a platform like Roblox is acting as a metaverse. So I can go into these types of where I'm just accessing it from a computer, but or whatever, a device. And I can go in as an avatar, and I can do, in that case, probably social and entertainment activities. So I might meet up with friends that might play games. It's a persistent world with multiplayer built into it. I can, all of these elements that we might consider a metaverse, or at least going in the direction of a metaverse. But kind of easy to access and for more social entertainment purposes. And then we move into those much more immersive experiences using a headset. But we're also looping back around into, we talk about just XR in general. Like there are lots of really awesome AR components that fit into education, fit into all facets of what we do in the world, but definitely fit into education. And briefly on a personal professional there's level, I can tell you that in 2018, 2019, we were equally exploring VR, AR. They were completely connected. We had the concept at that time, and I'm sure many are doing this now, but some are also just building their endurance. So we had this concept that you access this software in the most accessible way that you can. So let's say that it's a laptop. Let's say that it's through a browser. Let's say that it's optimized so that it runs smoothly on any kind of bandwidth. And then for 20 to 30 minutes, you could go into a full VR experience, right? And this helped to limit the motion sickness, or I think it's technically called cyber sickness, that people experience, especially when they haven't had as much time in a headset. Now, again, it's something that some people are more susceptible to. It's also something you can build endurance around. And in fact, one of the things that my company does right now is actually to test out um, all kinds of options that are out there to say, this one is more suitable for, like, this one reduces cyber sickness, or this one is more suitable for socializing, or this one leaves lots of room for conversation, right? So these very specific things that we now have identified that we're looking for. But that's a tangent, so put that aside for just a moment. so, um, so AR with like this natural extension where it was like, hey, now that we've done these things, go out into the world and using an augmented tool, do these tasks, experience these things, find these things, come back and report on it. And circling back to today, the pandemic really put a halt to a lot of the AR work, because that concept of sending people out into the world we weren't doing that at that time, as we all know. But we're able to, most people in most places are really able to get back to that space. And so that is starting to ramp back up. So how do we incorporate these cool AR experiences. What can they do for education? How can we access them and so on? So lots there. I'll pause.
Yeah, no, it's, I didn't really think about AR in that way of how the pandemic affected it there, because yeah, we're like, at XpertVR, we're mostly or developed one AR app, but other than that, everything we do is VR. So not really thinking about it too often and how, yeah, that lack of real world being able to test in the real world, definitely I can see how that would affect AR. Yeah, interesting perspective there.
Yeah.
Um, I guess to go back to your tangent there, curious to dive a little bit more into Relish Studios and like
Yeah.
what are some of the projects that you can share that you're working on?
Yeah. So we're having a lot of fun at Relish. So Relish is a pretty quickly growing studio. We have one in Toronto. We're focused mostly on our gaming side of things in Toronto. We have a studio in Ottawa where we're focused mostly on the digital side of things, apps and websites, and also just R&D, whatever we can focus on. A studio out in on Vancouver Island where they're focused more on animation. What's fun there is animation is like really, they're using Unreal, whereas in our Toronto studio, we're typically using Unity and then, digging into Roblox and some of these other platforms that we're playing around with. Um, but we did recently run an Unreal project. Um, you know, People who are listening might kind of be paying attention to Unreal 5. There's lots of hype around it. There's lots of Unity has really kind of been the front runner in um, the gaming space and the metaverse space here. But again, Unreal and animation and lots of other places. But now we're kind of looking at what can Unreal, do for us and so on. So we get to do work quite broadly at Relish. We do a combination of our internal product and IP, things that we love, that we're passionate about, that we develop sometimes on the side, and sometimes teams are working on it full time. Often teams are working on it full time. We also get to partner with various types of organizations and create for them or create with them. So sometimes joint IP and sometimes what we call, service design, where we're really understanding their needs and proposing back how we would do this and then building it for them. Um, we have lots of. I'm trying to think of what's interesting, but also what I can share.
Okay.
And I'm debating on one of my very favorite that launches next week. So maybe next week what I'll do is shoot me a note and I'll send you a link. But what I
Okay.
will say
Yeah,
is
perfect.
we get to work with a large cultural institute that people would be familiar with, doing like really, really fun, like relatively experimental stuff. So we built it's their first metaverse. They're calling it a metaverse. As many of us know, it's a very broad term that can mean a lot of things, but I'll generally say it's their metaverse. Uh, they wanted a photorealistic, like a really, they had just done a large architectural redesign and they wanted to represent that, but also allow people anywhere in the world to be able to come into this physical space virtually, of course, walk around, see the design, learn about it, and experience some of the cultural activities that happen there. In be it musical performances and video performances and so on. So, so yeah, we launch next week. It's absolutely gorgeous. It's built in Unreal, and Unreal just allowed it to make it more photorealistic. Really play around with lighting. It's like a gorgeous space. You go in as your avatar. We played around with some elements too to kind of fill the space in different ways. So we got to play around with pixel streaming so that we could make it accessible easily on a browser and also mobile device. We played around with volumetric 4D volumetric recording, so that we could take a real life performance and allow in a virtual space for you to walk around, see every element of that performance happening, the person, the instruments, but also hear it. Like very, very cool, fun stuff. What else did we play around with? We played around with bringing in metahumans. So yeah, lots of things where again, when you're kind of driving forward on one path with one product, you don't always get that chance to rethink, okay, well, what are people doing now? How can I bring this technology in? And at Relish, we have these various things on the go where we get to kind of rethink it and try new things and play around with new technologies and advise people. So that's one. if a little vague, that's one that's been super fun to work on that I'm excited for us to launch. But again, we're also in that sort of metaverse realm that isn't VR specific. We're also developing in Roblox. We're also because we have a very strong kids and family um, uh, focus. So a big chunk of our work is kids and family, and the kids are on Roblox. Just where they are, so we want to meet them there.
For sure, for sure.
We're also playing around. There's a bit of a newer technology out of South Korea that I'm not sure I would say it competes with Roblox, but it's in the same vein. So it's the Geppetto platform. And we've started to develop games that are, again, kind of co-produced with their platform that we can put forward as Relish Studios, but also looking at potential to develop with them some more. So anyway, lots of things on the go, but there's a few.
Awesome. Well, no, that project sounds really exciting. I'm looking forward to when you can share the link next week to check it out. And I think that's so amazing that you found a client that allows you to experiment that much because it's yeah, meta humans, the volumetric tracking, pixel streaming, like all those things are very new technologies that I know like
Yeah.
our R&D team is like looking into and haven't even introduced it into a project yet. So it's so cool that you get to like experiment with it in a project and work on.
I I agree 100%. Yeah, my shipped earlier this year from like full single product startup that I co-founded to moving over. There was a bit of a decision process there in terms of like, why would I do this? How would it benefit, my growing and experience? And the big thing was, there's variety and there's this chance at like a really important juncture to look broadly at big and small, but like lots of small, more experimental things where we're trying to push the boundaries and see what we can pull off. Because as you might know, as your team is thinking about it, you start this and you're like, I'm not sure if we can actually do it. You spend a couple of weeks going, I don't think it's going to work.
Yeah,
And
it's
then you
a
turn this corner and it's like, wow, what did we build?
yeah, it's a constant battle. Myself on the sales side and our CTO on the technical side, I'll come in and be like, yeah, I saw this thing online and I agreed that we would do it in a project. Like, what do you mean? But
Yeah.
he always
Yeah.
figures it out, and our team's amazing. So sounds
Yeah. It's
like
so
at Relish Studios as well.
Oh, the team is amazing. Yeah, that was actually another benefit was just being able to work with not just incredible people, but really, really talented people that I knew had all kinds of experience. And again, like some of this is so new. It's not that they have experience in these specific technologies, but they know how to tackle it. They know how to think about it. They know how to research. They know how to figure it out. But yeah, we had a sort of a joke at work where a senior tech person several weeks in kind of comes back and says, "Did you sign the contract yet?" And I'm like, it's like, yeah, yeah, I did.
Yeah,
So we're doing it.
yeah, definitely been in that
Like, don't,
position.
don't ask. It's not a question I want to hear. It's too late. Anyway.
Well, on that side of the team, I'm really curious. We use Unity at XpertVR as well, but that switching between Unity and Unreal, like, did you bring in a new team that had that Unreal skills, or was everybody jumping into
Yeah.
Unity? And then I'm curious as well, comparing those two to something like Roblox and those other types
Mhm.
of editors. Yeah, opinions, how you do it, and as well, like as a professor, if somebody was looking to bring on like a team of students to work with
Oh,
those
yeah.
suggestions there.
Yeah, so the professor side of it's a totally different if I don't touch on it, remind me to come back
Okay.
to it because that's a so but yeah, on the practical side of things, this is something we toyed around with like in several of those areas, right? So the project that I mentioned that we are just launching in Unreal, we started by we all the client and our team, we all started with, well, we'll do it in Unity. So, it was this kind of evolution of, well, hang on, you want these requirements, you want these requirements. This is going to be harder in Unity. This is going to take longer in Unity. Um, Practically looking at like, what do we have available to us and Unreal with the right solution for that project. But to your point, I have a big Unity team. That's what we do. It's a lot of what we do. Now, again, at Relish, we were able to kind of talked to some of our other teams about, so, there's a big, huge 3D modeling aspect of it. And it's like, okay, well, I don't have Unreal 3D modelers, but my team does, right? The animation studio does.
Mm.
So in that case, we were able to access our 3D modelers relatively in-house. But the programming side of it was a combination of bringing in, of starting in-house with people. And again, these were more senior Unity devs that had broad experience, had a little bit of Unreal, but hadn't been working in Unreal for years and recently. And so they got everything up and running. And then we did bring in an outside Unreal developer who had a ton of experience. But it was an exercise of looking strategically, right? So it was a little bit of, okay, how much do we kind of train up in house? And of course, with tight timelines, sometimes that's not the answer that you can go with. How much do you bring from outside? And there's always a risk involved in that, because we looked at like, are we hiring full time? Is this an area that we're developing? Is this something we're just doing for a single project? Like, how do we think about that piece of it? There's often, in organizations like mine, there's often co-productions and partnerships you've done in the past. So there's other studios that have expertise that you could work with as well, and they can take a piece of the work. So in each of these areas, we looked very carefully at how to handle this. And for this specific one, we did as much in-house as we could, which again was all of our tech team and our 3D modeling, but with one kind of senior Unreal person coming in, doing a lot of the dev work, but also just some of that kind of fast tracking the work that people would have had to think about a little bit more,
Right.
and have time to really research. Now, the Roblox side of it was like a really fun, different one, because again, our Unity team, some of the people who were interested, some of the people who were more senior played around and they were like, yeah, I think I could do Roblox. It's pretty close. We'll just do a little bit here. We could totally do it. And then again, we looked broadly at, okay, do we hire? Do we contract to just get some consulting and maybe a little bit of development? Do we partner with other studios? What we found as our approach, we did a few things, but what we found as our approach was, again, this opportunity to cross-skill and upskill internally, but bring in one person who has, 10 years Roblox development experience, but also has spent the last number of years training Unity devs on Roblox. So that's that. So that was very cool, because the gap between Unity and Roblox, and to be clear, I'm not a Unity or a Roblox developer, so if this is what my team tells me.
Neither am I, so I completely understand.
So it's not a huge chasm. They can get there very quickly, but what essentially the person who spent this time, who came from the Roblox perspective and is training all of these Unity devs, is saying is, when you come from the Unity, as in any situation, when you come from that perspective, you're looking at it in kind of that tool set that you're thinking about from the Unity view. When you come at it from the Roblox view, there are these few little things that I can help you to think about in a different way that fast track what you're doing. So that's sort of how we've thought strategically about building out the Roblox side, is internal training, but with some external expertise. And when I say external, we looked external and brought people in. And then build it out. So as fast as it grows, the first opportunity is to skill in-house. But if we're going faster than that, absolutely hiring outside. And again, there's a few other parallels. So the Geppetto technology, we slightly different, but same idea. I don't know if that answers your question on that piece of it, or if I
it gives
if I got a little bit.
a great example of both and how to go down that path. So on the education side, then.
Yeah. So the reason I said bring me back to this is because when I have a lot of strong feelings and thoughts and experiences on the education side, but the thing I find really interesting is we are moving quickly. We've said that already in this in this conversation. And education always with fast moving technologies has a hard time keeping up. So how do you continue to keep programming relevant, get courses and programs approved in institutions that need a little bit of time to do that kind of thing, when the technology is just like, 6 months ago, we would be having a different conversation. And a lot of what I talked about today, we haven't done that 6 months ago, but nobody else had either, or most people hadn't either. So so that's where it's like really interesting where we started, um, Adaptica, our solution to education in the metaverse. Nobody we were within a college and a research institution, but nobody had the training to do what we were trying to do. And what was unique about our approach in one way was just grabbing these areas of expertise, right? So we have game developers who understand how to create games and work community and maybe do the art and the modeling side of it, but they don't know how to build a multiplayer persistent world where you're not creating it's hard to anticipate what the interactions are, right? So in gaming, like you're anticipating what people are going to do and what you want them to do and what they're going to be rewarded for and where they're going to go and when and how long. And that makes it easier to develop. I'm not saying that it's easy, but it makes it predictable. A metaverse environment is much less predictable in all facets, right? So then we bring in human factors experts and we're like, okay, let's think about how people interact with technology and like what are the experiences we're trying to get to and how do we have to think about that? But we're also trying to do it for education. Then you have to bring in people with an expertise in education to think about, well, these are educational experiences. How do I gamify education? How do I really take advantage of the technology? And so on, right? And that was what we were doing. It was okay. How do we bring together these different experts to cross collaborate and like really build something that we're not teaching in school yet? And today we're still not. We're teaching, elements of this, and we're moving quickly and we're pushing the boundaries, but we're not. I don't have students coming out of school. I don't have programs in school that teach what we're doing in the real world yet. So it's a different version of the same challenge. It's a challenge that a lot of people are tackling in different ways, but it's not going away. So this idea of bringing in micro credentialing, so kind of like faster upgrading boot camps, different ways of getting that kind of more specific training in a very fast way, and in some cases in a more affordable way, is part of it. But it also brings us back to that like regulation and standardization side of things. It's a little bit of where did you do that and what did you and how 3 weeks? Okay, do you feel like are you ready? A little bit of that that plays into that. So some of what and again, lots of ways that people are tackling it. The shorter courses, the micro credentials are a piece of it. That work integrated learning piece of it, where you're spending some time, whether it's a co-op or maybe a paid student position or whatever it is, in these groups like Relish, where you can see what's actually happening and how to think about it. Also, those research opportunities where we're doing, in research and innovation, bringing industry in to solve a problem like a universal avatar and having students work on it, right? We're not teaching that in school yet, but we're just trying to find these ways to bring it in. And so I think it's a much bigger conversation that I'm very interested in, because where is that course on how to how to develop the Eduverse or even the Metaverse, or how to think about like staying really on the cutting edge of emerging technologies and evolving technologies. And yeah, I love that conversation, but that's the landscape as I see it. We're not there. We're working on it. We're pulling, we're built. It's not like you're laying the track as the train is going, right? And we're doing
Yes.
it in industry. So how can you do any better in education?
No, but I think that's a great point of how can either just through a co-op program have students partnering with industry so that they can learn how to lay the track while the train's going, or have those research projects where we have, whether that's with
Yeah,
industry or in school, just being able to explore those things. Those are two great paths to get
yeah,
students learning about this. But definitely, I agree. I
yeah.
think we need those courses created sooner than later inside like a game development program, as well as maybe other programs where students can learn about the metaverse or the Eduverse and how to develop particularly for those types of platforms. Yeah.
Mhm. Yeah, yeah, and I think what we're both kind of dancing around too is practical programs. So I know some institutions are looking at, I think what they're calling like practical master's degrees. And I've done a few less practical master's degrees. Good experiences, not very practical. So yeah, like getting to really focus on something with maybe a self-directed portion of it, but that is practical and hands-on, and you're building and being in that space. So that's a cool way that I'm seeing develop more and more to tackle the problem as well.
Amazing, amazing. And
Yeah.
to partially pivot, but still going off of what we were just talking about with like metaverses, obviously, thank you again for having me on your podcast, Metaverse by Startup.club. Um, so to take, I guess, a bunch of steps back, what do you
Yeah.
see as the metaverse, and how do you see that in the future, 5, 10 years down the road? I know that's always the the big question of how that's going to affect
Yeah.
education.
Yeah, 100%. I hear and ask and contribute to that question almost every week. So, uh, and it's sort of fun to see how it evolves and what we're thinking about. Um, the metaverse is we do a monthly conversation. We host it on Clubhouse, but it is recorded. It goes on to Startup.club, and soon it will be on all the podcast. Your favorite podcast app. Um, and that's a really fun way of connecting with, well, people like you, people who are just in the industry, who are looking at it from all different ways. But we always ask, like, what is the metaverse and is it here yet? Right. And um, when I start at some point early in that podcast, we started to have published literature on this. So things like Matthew Ball's book, he's done a lot of talking on it. A lot of other, I have a small library, probably half a dozen books on the metaverse now. And, publishing is always kind of dated by the time it's published. But the fact that we're at the point where we're publishing about this stuff is really interesting. And he gives a I'm going to say both clear and vague, a very broad but pretty defined definition of what the metaverse is, which is fairly widely accepted. So a lot of people will take elements of that definition and say that's what it is. And that's what leads into the is it here yet? So the sort of the core pieces of what the metaverse needs to be is a persistent world, a persistent virtual world. So it's always there. Uh, Generally, it really has to be a multiplayer experience, right? So many of us can go in at any point. Generally speaking, we should be able to walk as a virtual avatar, represent ourselves, talk to each other. But ideally, we also have these virtual assets, be it the actual avatar, be it clothing, be it real estate, be it other items, collectibles that we can virtually, tangibly own, which is a big part of where the blockchain comes into it. In kind of the ideal version of the metaverse or the multiverse, we're taking those items with us throughout. So we have these connected metaverses. And again, that's a piece where we're not there right now. And it does hinder us. It also helps us to really explore these specific areas and needs, because you asked earlier, what are some of the favorite like tools to use as a professor? And I ask that same question. I collect the answers. I do some research. My team does some research. But what I always start with is, well, what are you using it for, right? Because right now we can categorize so education is one, yeah, social is one, entertainment and gaming is one, right? So we have these different reasons that we're using this technology. And so today, that's part of what defines these different metaverses, why I would go there, what I'm doing there, what it's good for, from a building side of it, how to think about it. Like that helps to build that box around how people are going to access it, how I'm going to, think about different elements of it, how I'm going to design. I mean, it's every level, right? So what kind of avatar do I need? Do they need to look really realistic, where we might get into a bit of the uncanny valley creepy stuff? Or can it be like just a blocky, uh, low fidelity thing? And it turns out it can be both, right? It can be anywhere in the middle. So it's like, how do I start to think about answering those questions to create something? And those boxes that we have today are helping us to do that, and also build some of that. We're not standardized yet and we're not regulated, but again, how to think about getting there. So, what does it need to be? I mean, in an ideal world, people want those to all be connected. They want us to be moving through them. We want it to be an XR experience, right? I want a headset can be very cool for some people at the limited period of time that they can access it. I want it to be like in an augmented version of IRL as well, right? Where I'm bringing this out into So lots of pieces there. A lot of people will also focus a lot more on the NFT blockchain side of things. I, with a lot of the work that I'm doing, we're bringing it in, but we're a little bit less focused on that piece of it, and that's also just a symptom of where we are today, right? There's a difference between the version of what we're doing today versus the ideal state. So I don't know if that answers your question at all, and I probably could keep talking about it, but I
No, no,
think that's where
definitely.
I'll end.
Like you said, it's such a broad word, and I think that's a great definition that you pulled there. But um, but yeah, it is kind of ever changing, and like you said, like NFTs and blockchain are kind of that ideal, but that technology is very new, and as we've seen over the past 6 months, and even over the past couple days with FTX and things going on there's a lot of problems and challenges to overcome in that space as well.
Volatility.
Yes,
Volatility. Yeah.
yes. But I think that's a great way to look at it. Of we need those open standards. We need to be able to transfer our own data, whether that's through blockchain technology or something else, across these different metaverse spaces. Um, and and I like that anecdote as well of um, yeah, you don't need that super realistic avatar. There's millions of kids playing with Roblox right now, or it is those blocky avatars. I know I play all kinds of VR games, and like our team every Monday we meet in Remio. Um, it's one of the platforms we use, one of the main ones, and yeah, it's this very oval shaped character, and you can like put facial features on and put on different hats, but it isn't super realistic at all. So yeah, but it works, and it works great. So, yeah, no,
Yeah.
very good point.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. It turns out you don't need legs in VR either, right?
yes, I think it is cool the more we can add it, but
I
yes,
agree. I agree.
I don't know if you
Saying it
saw,
works.
do you follow The Scared Ghost, Anthony Vidalo? He's
No,
he's
but I
a
will.
a journalist in the VR space, and always kind of like on the top of news, and a great newsletter, and then puts out a lot of great posts on social media as well. And
Okay.
I think, yeah, it was this past April Fools. I believe time's flying by. I can't remember if this one or the one before. But he made a whole commercial about the leg verse, and it was a metaverse where you only have legs. And you just there's legs just walking around, and that's how you know it's a really funny
That's
April Fools joke.
nice. That's funny.
Well, I see we're kind of coming up on time, so something I've been trying to do on our podcast as we're starting up here is this kind of rapid fire round, and we've touched on a few of these topics. I might skip some of them, um, but basically, I'll just say like one or two words, and then whatever comes to mind, if it's just one word or you have a quick sentence, uh, and not all of them are professional related, and just kind of lets people know a little bit more about Carrie as well. So the first one,
Uh-oh.
pop culture. What comes to mind?
Oh, gee. Uh, so like totally weird answer, but honestly, the first thing that pops into my mind is books. I know it's weird. Like yeah, it's not a big part of my world today, but it was a huge part of my education and career before now. So yeah, books.
Nice. Conference or conferences.
Oh, I spent a ton of time in teachers conferences and eventually at EdTech conferences, but these days it's all about the virtual events. We spent a couple of years running them during the pandemic, and now there's very cool immersive, in-person immersive conferences, but also like online VR stuff. So yeah,
Love it, love it. Yeah, for anybody that hasn't checked out VR conferences, definitely jump in, whether you just have a
Mhm.
computer or if you have a VR headset.
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah, exactly.
Next one, we briefly just kind of touched on it, but educational NFTs.
Oh, I mean, yeah, like badging, micro credential. Yeah,
Awesome, awesome. Education in general, just education.
mm, high flex learning. Let's
Flex
get
learning.
there.
Love it, love it.
Yeah.
I guess going back to your first one, favorite book.
Oh, so I have several degrees in literature, and it's like I wouldn't know how to. I'd have to pick a category.
That works.
Yeah, I don't have a good answer for that one. A lot, many.
What would be the category
I
or
have a bunch
genre?
of things popping. Like, I mean, again, like it's too broad, but a few that just jumped into my head were like, oh, Vonnegut's cool, Steinbeck's cool, like lots of different, certainly in the metaverse space, I have like a few favorites already, but I'm also like, do I promote my friends or not? I mean, read Matthew Ball's book, read my friend Tom Fisk's book, which is a very accessible handbook to the metaverse. Yeah. Gi give me come ask me again in a week, I'll give it a thought.
Okay, perfect. Well, curious if you'll have a similar answer here, but favorite movie.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, so I've been doing a lot of flying lately, so I've revisited, a broad, broad spectrum of movies that, I got to see the new, Top Gun movie on the flight, a week ago, and
Great movie.
then yesterday I saw, what is it called? Everywhere what is it called? I have to look up the title. Um
Everything Everywhere.
You know the one, Everything
I
Everywhere
haven't
All at
seen it,
Once.
but
Yeah, yeah,
yeah.
yeah. Yeah, it was recommended to me, and at first I was like, "Why am I watching this?" And eventually I was like, "Oh, lots of things to think about there." Favorite, I'm not gonna say neither of those are my favorite by any means, just things that are top of mind right
Yeah.
now. Yeah, again, I'll try to get an answer for you.
Okay, perfect. And then the last one, either in the XR space, blockchain, metaverse, Web3 in general, what's kind of been the top news over the past week or past month that's been on your mind or that you've been.
Yeah, I mean, like NFTs, I'm much more optimistic than everybody else, but people are obviously very worried about like crypto crashing and is this going to stick around and should I invest in, in in virtual, in meta land space and all of that. So that lots of conversations around that going on. But again, I'm more optimistic at like we're really early days. It was designed to be volatile. There are also new like people are also evolving the models to you can create more stability. I won't go really deep into that, but obviously, the more stability that you're creating, more centralized you're probably getting. You might be looking at tethering as well. Those are things that people typically don't want. So few kind of trade-offs there. And then hardware, right? Like that isn't a space that throughout a lot of this, I wasn't kind of big into the newest hardware. We were trying to be as accessible and as get as many people accessing this technology in whatever ways they were able to. But pretty excited about some of the new hardware coming out. And yeah, so I'm going to pause there.
Amazing, amazing. No, great
Yeah,
spectrum of things to look into there that have been in the news lately.
yeah.
Yeah, so we're at time and would just love to give you as much time as you would like to quickly plug anything. Obviously, we talked about Relish. You're teaching at George Brown. Anything in particular that you would like the audience to check out, or help from the audience, or anything in general?
Yeah, I mean, this has been such a pleasure. When you said we were going to talk for an hour, I thought, oh, it's probably too long, but I would be happy to keep talking. This has been really awesome. It was very cool to have you on the metaverse. So still a new, I think we're going into our fifth or sixth episode and it's evolving. We're launching some cool new stuff for next year where we can stay connected just a little bit more frequently. Also, we're going to do a really cool segment on 2023 looking forward. So what is that going to mean in the metaverse and the VR
Cool,
space?
cool.
Yeah, the teaching side of things is just really fun and experimental. It gets to keep me in touch with what's happening. But certainly, if people are doing experimental, forward thinking experimental things in education, I would love to chat in whatever capacity, whether it's on the metaverse, whether it's in a teaching capacity, whether it's something that we can help at Relish to kind of build and explore. Um, we also, and this might be interesting to you, Evan, I also work with an entrepreneurship organization based out of Toronto. So it's a global leaders organization. And it's just a place to bring entrepreneurs and leaders together to support. A lot of us are working in new and quickly evolving spaces or leading organizations that are high growth and kind of experiencing new things all the time that we're looking for that network to support us and advise and support others. And so that's something else I spend time on that anybody who feels like that's relevant to them, get in touch. I'd love to chat about that more too. Yeah. And
Amazing.
thank you
Yeah.
so much for doing this.
Yeah, thank you for coming on. Yeah, I'll definitely check that out as well as an entrepreneur, and yeah, all the links to startup.club, Relish Studios,
Mhm.
and everything else. We'll make sure to put in the show notes so that people can find you. Yeah, so thank you so much again for coming on. Like you said, I think there's so many more questions that I had and so many more questions that came up during our conversation. So we could definitely go another hour, I think. So we'll have to have you back on sometime. But thank you again for
Yeah.
coming, Carrie.
Well, absolutely. Absolutely my pleasure. And I'll look forward to chatting again sometime soon.
Awesome. Have a good one, Carrie, and thanks for being
You
on the
too.
podcast.
Thank you. Bye.